Hey there. Today we're diving deep, into a topic that's been causing quite a stir in Canada.
Hmm.
Equity hiring.
Yeah,
Seems like it's everywhere you turn these days.
it really does. Yeah,
We've got a really fascinating mix of sources to dig into today.
we do.
We've got a really lively Reddit discussion thread on Syria, Canada,
Okay.
and we've got a thought-provoking article from the National Post.
Excellent.
So buckle up, because I think we're going to be unpacking some pretty strong opinions today and maybe even uncover a few surprises along the way.
Absolutely. I think you're
I
right.
think we're going to go way beyond just sort of skimming the surface of what people think about equity hiring.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
we're really going to dig into the why.
Yeah.
Why is this such a hot button issue?
Exactly.
We'll examine the arguments for and against, see how these ideas are playing out in real life scenarios.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're going to leave you pondering some critical questions about the future of work in Canada.
Sounds like a plan.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do.
Okay, so let's jump right in.
Okay.
That National Post article that you mentioned,
Yeah.
it had this poll in there that really caught my eye.
Right.
It found that a majority of Canadians,
Mm-hmm.
57% to be exact,
Wow.
are actually opposed to employers considering someone's cultural or ethnic background when they're making hiring decisions.
That's a significant number.
Yeah.
And what's particularly interesting, I think, is that this resistance to equity hiring in Canada is even stronger than in the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so the poll highlights a potential tension, I think, between two deeply held Canadian values,
Yeah.
fairness and meritocracy.
Right.
So while Canadians we know strongly support equality,
Yeah.
they're also wary of anything that might be perceived as reverse discrimination
Right.
or, undermining the principle of hiring the most qualified person for the job.
It really does raise some questions about how Canadians are defining merit and whether that definition always takes into account the systemic barriers that are faced by certain groups.
Precisely. It's not as simple as just saying, hire the best person.
Right.
We have to consider what factors actually contribute to someone being considered the best,
Yeah.
and whether those factors are truly objective
Right.
or if they're influenced by unconscious biases
Mhm.
and historical inequalities.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of some of the personal experiences that were shared in that Reddit discussion thread.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of users talked about feeling uneasy about having to declare their minority status when they're applying for jobs.
I can see that.
Like one user from distance
Okay.
mentioned feeling like they were being reduced to their ethnicity
Yeah,
rather than being evaluated based on their skills and experience.
that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that sense of being categorized or tokenized is a really common concern.
Yeah.
While the intention behind asking for that information might be to track diversity metrics.
It can inadvertently create a sense of otherness,
I see.
and then it can lead individuals to question whether they're being judged fairly.
Right, right.
Yeah.
There's another user, Notacreepanomo13,
Okay.
and they shared an experience that really kind of highlights this tension.
Okay.
They describe feeling resentful for actually being hired based on their skin color rather than their qualifications,
Wow.
which, ultimately led to this sense of inadequacy and self-doubt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So these anecdotal accounts, I think, really illustrate the complexity of equity hiring.
Mm-hmm.
While it aims to create a more level playing field
Right.
and to increase representation,
Yeah.
it can unintentionally have unintended consequences,
Yes.
leading to feelings of discomfort and resentment,
Right.
even among those that it's meant to benefit.
Right. And it seems like that complexity extends beyond just, individual feelings.
Yeah.
Several Reddit users express concern about the impact of equity hiring on team dynamics and overall productivity.
Right. Like there's this worry that a hyper-focus on diversity
Yeah.
could unintentionally lead to a decline in competence
Mm-hmm.
if less qualified individuals are hired to fulfill quotas.
Right.
Users like Not Moffat and the Fix It Up Chappie,
Okay.
they shared stories about witnessing qualified candidates being passed over,
Wow.
which led to, frustration,
Yeah.
resentment within teams,
Yeah.
and a perceived drop in performance.
I can see how that would happen.
These concerns really challenge us, I think, to think critically about the potential trade-offs
Mm-hmm.
between achieving representational diversity
Mm-hmm.
and maintaining a high level of competence within a workforce.
Exactly, yeah. And it pushes us to consider whether those two goals are truly at odds or if there are ways to achieve both without sacrificing one for the other.
It seems like a lot of the anxiety and debate surrounding equity hiring
Yeah.
stems from the very definition of diversity itself.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'm thinking of a comment from Zinnik Curran,
Okay.
who pointed out this interesting inconsistency in a lot of diversity questionnaires.
Okay.
All European ethnicities are lumped together as white,
Oh, interesting.
while other continents have much more detailed breakdowns.
That's a really astute observation.
Yeah.
It highlights the evolving and often subjective nature of how we categorize and define diversity.
Right.
Grouping all European backgrounds under one umbrella term ignores the vast cultural and historical differences between, say, someone of Greek heritage and someone of Irish descent.
Yeah.
Are we truly embracing a multitude of perspectives when we rely on these broad, sometimes reductive categories?
Yeah. It makes you wonder if these categories are actually capturing the richness of cultural backgrounds, or if they're simply perpetuating a narrow view of what diversity truly encompasses.
And it begs the question, are we creating new divisions and hierarchies, even as we strive for inclusivity?
Speaking of broader systemic issues, another hot topic in that Reddit thread was the prevalence of temporary foreign workers, or TFWs. In certain sectors, especially in the fast food industry, user Don't Drop My Base argued that this reliance on TFWs is less about equity hiring and more about companies taking advantage of workers who are vulnerable due to their immigration status.
Right.
This is where the conversation gets really interesting.
Yeah.
It brings to light the intersection of labor rights, immigration policies, and perceptions of equity hiring.
Right.
Are we truly promoting fairness and equity if we're relying on a workforce that might be more susceptible to exploitation due to fear of deportation or limited legal protections?
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the conversation.
It does.
It seems like we can't really discuss equity in hiring without acknowledging the broader context of immigration policies.
And how they impact the labor market.
Absolutely. It forces us to consider, is it truly equity if the system is structured in a way that creates and perpetuates vulnerabilities?
So now, kind of shifting our focus to the role of the Canadian government.
Okay.
The National Post article mentions that they've actually had specific equity targets in place for hiring since the 1980s.
That's right.
Yeah. And the article points out that the percentage of visible minorities hired by the federal government has seen a steady increase over the years.
Okay.
So this suggests that there's a clear effort to increase representation in the public sector.
Right. So the government is actively attempting to promote diversity within its own ranks.
Right. But as we've seen from the poll results and those pretty passionate Reddit discussions, there's a lot of division about whether this is the right approach.
Exactly. And it leads us to, I think, a crucial question we need to grapple with.
Okay.
How do we balance the pursuit of a more diverse workforce with those deeply held Canadian values of fairness and meritocracy?
And that's really where the need for nuance and deeper understanding comes in.
Absolutely. Simple solutions rarely address complex problems.
Right.
We need to move beyond these polarized positions and engage in, more thoughtful, informed dialogues about how to create truly inclusive and equitable workplaces that benefit everyone.
It's clear that equity hiring in Canada is more than just a political debate.
Right.
It has tangible, real-life consequences for individuals and workplaces.
For sure.
What's kind of standing out to you so far as we delve deeper into this topic?
What's striking me is just how deeply personal this issue is. We're not just talking about abstract policies. We're exploring real people's lived experiences, their sense of fairness, their opportunities for advancement in the workplace. And those are stories that deserve careful consideration. As we navigate this really complex landscape.
For sure.
As we dig deeper into these sources, one thing that keeps coming up is this lack of a clear shared understanding of what equity hiring actually means. It seems like a lot of Canadians view it as simply hiring more people from minority groups, even if they might be less qualified for a particular role.
Yeah, and it's that perception, right? That qualifications might be taking a backseat to representation. that fuels so much of the pushback and anxiety that we're seeing.
Right.
Like some Reddit users even went so far as to say that it feels like white men need not apply.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a pretty provocative statement.
It is.
But it does highlight a very real fear.
Right.
That some groups are being unfairly excluded.
Yeah. I think it's crucial that we acknowledge those fears and anxieties rather than just dismissing them as unfounded or bigoted.
Right.
You know, a productive conversation about equity requires us to understand where these concerns are coming from and to address them in a way that fosters genuine inclusion without alienating any group.
So how do we navigate that? How do we ensure that equity doesn't come at the expense of fairness?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I think part of the solution lies in moving beyond these binary either frameworks.
Okay.
You know, it's not about choosing between diversity or meritocracy, but rather recognizing that these values can and should coexist. The key is to create a system that embraces both.
Yeah.
Ensuring that opportunities are truly accessible to all, while upholding the importance of skills, qualifications, and individual contributions.
So how do we actually translate those ideals into like actionable steps?
Yeah.
What would a system that effectively balances these values look like in practice?
Well, first and foremost, I think it would require a genuine commitment to understanding and addressing the systemic barriers that prevent certain groups from fully participating in the workforce. So this might involve initiatives aimed at improving access to education and skills training, addressing biases in recruitment and promotion processes, and creating more inclusive workplace cultures.
And wouldn't this also require kind of a shift in how we define and measure merit? Like, can we truly assess someone's potential based solely on traditional metrics? Like degrees and work experience? Without considering those systemic factors that might have actually limited their opportunities.
You've hit on a really crucial point. A system that genuinely values both diversity and merit would need to adopt a more holistic and nuanced approach to evaluating candidates. So this might involve recognizing the value of diverse experiences and perspectives, considering non-traditional qualifications, and implementing blind recruitment processes that help to mitigate unconscious bias.
It seems like this would require a pretty significant overhaul of current hiring practices, as well as a willingness to really challenge those deeply ingrained assumptions about what constitutes qualifications and potential.
Absolutely. It would demand a fundamental shift in mindset, both at the individual and organizational level. You know, it would require us to question our biases, to be open to new ways of thinking, and to embrace the idea that a truly diverse and inclusive workforce is not only a moral imperative, but also a strategic advantage.
Yeah, it's clear that creating a more equitable and inclusive system is a complex and multifaceted challenge.
It is.
One that's going to require ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt and learn as we go.
Couldn't agree more. And it's a challenge that demands our collective attention and commitment. The stakes are high, not just for individuals seeking opportunities, but for the very fabric of our society and the future of our economy.
Okay, so now before we wrap up this fascinating discussion, I want to touch on one final and critical point I think that emerged from our deep dive. The need for clarity and open dialogue. You know, it's become really evident that the conversation around equity hiring often gets bogged down in semantics and oversimplification.
You're absolutely right. Terms like diversity, equity, and meritocracy are frequently thrown around without a shared understanding of what they mean or how they relate to one another. This lack of clarity can lead to misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and ultimately to a breakdown in communication and progress.
It seems like we're grappling with this real paradox, you know? Canadians overwhelmingly support the idea of fairness and equality. But there's this deep-seated discomfort with policies that seem to prioritize representation over merit. So how do we reconcile these seemingly conflicting values?
That's the core challenge, isn't it? And I think part of the solution lies in moving beyond these binary either-or frameworks. You know, it's not about choosing between diversity or meritocracy, but rather recognizing that these values can and should coexist. The key is to create a system that embraces both,
Right.
ensuring that opportunities are truly accessible to all, while also upholding the importance of skills, qualifications, and individual contributions.
So how do we translate those ideals into, like, actionable steps? What would a system that effectively balances these values actually look like in practice?
Well, first and foremost, I think it would require a genuine commitment to understanding and addressing the systemic barriers that prevent certain groups from fully participating in the workforce.
Okay.
So this might involve initiatives aimed at improving access to education and skills training, addressing biases in recruitment and promotion processes, and creating, more inclusive workplace cultures.
And wouldn't this also require a shift in how we define and measure merit?
Yeah.
Like, can we truly assess someone's potential based solely on those traditional metrics like degrees and work experience?
You're right.
Without considering the systemic factors that might have limited their opportunities?
You hit on a crucial point.
Yeah.
A system that genuinely values both diversity and merit would need to adopt a more holistic and nuanced approach to evaluating candidates.
Okay.
So this might involve recognizing the value of diverse experiences and perspectives, considering non-traditional qualifications, and implementing blind recruitment processes that help to mitigate unconscious bias.
It seems like this would require a pretty significant overhaul of current hiring practices.
Yeah.
As well as a willingness to challenge those deeply ingrained assumptions about what constitutes qualifications and potential.
Absolutely. It would demand a fundamental shift in mindset, both at the individual and organizational level.
Right.
Yeah. It would require us to question our biases.
Be open to new ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And to embrace the idea that a truly diverse and inclusive workforce is not only a moral imperative, but also a strategic advantage.
It's clear that creating a more equitable and inclusive system is a complex and multifaceted challenge.
It is.
One that requires ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and a willingness to adapt and learn as we go.
Couldn't agree more. And it's a challenge that demands our collective attention and commitment.
Yeah.
The stakes are high. Not just for individuals seeking opportunities. For the very fabric of our society and the future of our economy.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm struck by the realization that the conversation around equity hiring is ultimately about much more than just filling job vacancies.
Yes.
It's about creating a society where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to contribute their unique talents and perspectives.
It's about building a Canada where success is determined not by the circumstances of one's birth or background, but by individual effort, talent, and a genuine commitment to contributing to the collective good.
That's a vision worth striving for, even if the path is long and complex.
Absolutely. The journey toward true equity and inclusion is ongoing.
It is.
And it requires continuous effort, dialogue, and a willingness to embrace that messy, imperfect process of growth and change.
Yeah, sure.
So, as we kind of come to the end of this deep dive into equity hiring in Canada, what's the most important takeaway you hope listeners will consider as they reflect on this conversation?
Well, I hope they'll embrace the complexity of this issue and resist the temptation to settle for simple answers or easy solutions, you know? Equity hiring is not about quotas or tokenism. It's about creating a system that recognizes and values the unique contributions of all individuals, regardless of their background. It's about building a future where everyone has a fair shot at success and where our workplaces reflect the rich diversity of Canadian society.
Beautifully put.
Thank you.
And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into equity hiring in Canada.
Great conversation.
We hope this conversation has been thought-provoking and informative. And we encourage you to continue exploring these crucial issues and engaging in constructive dialogue with others.
Absolutely.
Until next time.